Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, May 14th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the state of Nebraska, the state of West Virginia, and the state of Donald Trump's endorsements across the nation and their impacts on Republican primaries in competitive races, in non-competitive races, and what it pretty much means as we move through these next upcoming primaries with Pennsylvania around the corner and many others as we continue down. There is a lot of important primaries that are really going to determine the balance of power because these candidates are so important for either political party. Now, Donald Trump, of course, as a Republican, really holds weight in Republican primaries in many states. But what you find from the title of this video and what you will find throughout the remainder of it is that Donald Trump may be benefiting some Republicans on one hand, but also on the other hand, finding them losing despite the Trump endorsement being out there for potentially months at a time. We find this in the case of Georgia specifically, where you're looking at a governor election where an incumbent is being challenged. But what happens in a race where there is a non-incumbent? It's an open race, and endorsements really make a huge difference. Now, this individual case comes down to the state of Nebraska, which had a three-way competitive Republican primary for the governor's race. Now, it was between Brett Lindstrom, who got third place, Charles Herbster, who got second place, and Jim Pillen, who got first place, with 33.7% of the vote. I mean, it was a very good three-way race, and it was very clear, based off of these results, that truly it could have gone to either three of these candidates, but it ultimately ended up with Jim Pillen. If I'm not pronouncing his name, I apologize. Maybe it's Pillen. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm going to go ahead and stick with Pillen for right now. He won the nomination, and that was just essentially the result. And if you take a look, there were some very clear coalitions for all of these candidates. On one hand, Brett Lindstrom was doing very well in the Omaha area, and you saw this. It made sense based off of just simply population, and also if you're taking a look at where we find the state of Nebraska, where the Republican primary was, well, you have the endorsements. The mayor of Omaha, a Republican, Brad Ashford, the former representative from Omaha's 2nd Congressional District, and these endorsements really made a pull for Brett Lindstrom in this area. So he got a significant portion of the vote in that area. Then you take a look across the state, you find Charles Herbster did much better in the rural, more, I would say, northern part of the state of Nebraska. But then dispersed throughout, from north to south, Jim Pillen did well in many, many parts of the state. Ultimately, that resulted in a 33.7% victory, but the point being that you saw very different coalitions around different areas. And I find it to be quite interesting, and it does tell you a lot about where the coalitions really are for Donald Trump and other Republicans that might be opposing a Trump-endorsed nominee. Now, the interesting thing about Nebraska is that while it is a state that maybe could have been competitive in the 2016 Republican presidential primary, when it was occurred and took place on May 9th, Donald Trump won 61% of the vote across the state. Ted Cruz got just 18%, John Kasich got 11%, and the rest of the candidates failed to get anywhere near double digits. And if you take a look at the results, Donald Trump won every single county across the entire state. You had numerous counties, and ultimately, Donald Trump landed tremendous victories. And it made sense. Donald Trump was the presumed frontrunner at this point in time, but there was no significant pushback against him. And it is quite interesting to say the least. Finding that Donald Trump's endorsement couldn't translate to a victory is quite shocking. But you also have to take a look at it and say, could Donald Trump's endorsement be more impactful if it only is Donald Trump's endorsement? And we actually might find that that isn't really the case, because there are circumstances where Trump's endorsement is just there, or it is being combated. Combativeness against Donald Trump's endorsement doesn't always work, but it worked in the state of Nebraska. But what we will find by the end of this is that it doesn't work in the other state that we looked at, the state of West Virginia, which we will talk about in just a moment. But taking a look at this three-way race, what do we notice? Well, Donald Trump's endorsement came in for Charles Herbster. This endorsement came, let's see when it came around, October 27th, 2021. So for months now, you're talking over half a year, the Republican Charles Herbster could have been campaigning and was campaigning on this Trump endorsement. And if you take a look at the other endorsements on this list, what do you have? Mike Foley, the lieutenant governor of the state, the former state auditor. What you find is Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota. You find state senators from the state. But what did that do? Not much, because he clearly did not win. You take a look at Brett Lindstrom. Who did he get? Brad Ashford, a Democrat previously a Republican, but served in Congress from the 2014 election. It was a surprise pickup opportunity for the Democratic Party. Brad Ashford won, then lost in 2016, ran again in 2018, couldn't win the primary, did not win, and unfortunately passed away very recently, I think April 2022, he passed away. But before he had passed away, he had made an endorsement for Brett Limstrong. And what you found is that he also got the endorsement for the mayor of Omaha. But the more notable endorsements beyond Donald Trump's came for Jim Pelen, where he saw a former U.S. rep from Nebraska's 3rd District, a conservative powerhouse, in addition to the governor of the state, the former Nebraska Attorney General, the current Nebraska Attorney General, the former governor of the state, 2 state senators, you have district attorneys, and you have organizations within Nebraska endorsing you. And what happened? This candidate ultimately won. When Donald Trump made that endorsement back in October, Charles Herbster was leading in the polls. But as more endorsements started to roll in for Jim Pelen, what you found was that he started to rise in the polls. And ultimately, by the final one, ended up with 31% of the vote, received 33% of the vote, and you found that Charles Herbster got 26%, he got 30%, and Brett Lindstrom got 16% of the poll, ended up getting 25%. So, point being, Trump's endorsement isn't everything, even though his candidacy was everything back in 2016, and of course, in 2020. If you take a look at Nebraska, it's a state that Donald Trump won by an overwhelmingly large amount. He won with 58% of the vote. If you actually take a look at the change between Nebraska in 2016 and 2020, you find a very little change. You take a look back at the 2016 election, Joe Biden got 5 points more than Hillary Clinton did, but Donald Trump's percentage across the state only reduced by 0.5, meaning that there were more voters that moved to Joe Biden for sure, but many of those third-party voters were about an even split. Actually, not an even split, more so for Joe Biden, but ultimately nothing significant really at all. It was a minor improvement for Biden, and he still lost the state by about 19 percentage points in the 2020 election, despite winning the 2nd congressional district. So, altogether, Nebraska is a red state through and through, yet Trump's endorsement could not carry this candidate across the finish line, could not even get a third of the vote across the state. But in West Virginia, it's a whole nother story. And it might make more sense for West Virginia when you think about it as one of the most conservative states in the nation, but it also is still very, very interesting. Now, I don't have the 2016 primary results in West Virginia just yet. Let's go ahead and pull that up because it is quite interesting to look at the previous election results, maybe just see what changed, what didn't change. This was May 10th, 2016. So let's see at this point in time, did it look like there was going to be much of a candidacy for any of these other candidates? No, it was clean sweeps for Trump up and down across the nation. But the point being that Trump got 77% of the vote in the state of West Virginia in the 2016 primary here. The interesting thing about this is that there were more votes in the Democratic primary than the Republican primary. There are technically a significant portion of registered Democrats in West Virginia that vote Republican. Ancestral Democrats no longer Democrats, but Donald Trump at the end of the day got 77% of the vote. Not a single other candidate scored within the top double digits. Ted Cruz coming close at 9%, but simply a poor showing for any and all Republicans besides Donald Trump in the state of West Virginia. And that translated to Alex Mooney's victory in the Republican primary. Now, if you don't know what happened in West Virginia and you're surprised that there are 2 incumbents, it actually circles back to redistricting. I know we hate to talk about it, but it's a very real reality of our congressional maps and congressional races. And because West Virginia lost a district, we found that West Virginia had to draw a new congressional map. Previously, they had 3. Republicans were solid in every single one of them. It wasn't necessarily a gerrymander more than it was just a representation of the state. You actually head over to West Virginia on the presidential map, and what do you find? It's a state that Donald Trump won every single county in the 2020 election. It was even worse for Hillary Clinton in 2016. Donald Trump defeated Joe Biden by 40 points across the state. At the end of the day, it's a red state through and through, and you were always going to find 3 red districts. But in this new map, you find even more solidified red districts. But it resulted in 2 incumbents put together, David McKinley and Alex Mooney. You cut West Virginia across the middle, and what you found was that Alex Mooney, who contained a significant portion of this part of the district, was thrown into the new 1st district, which is now, in total, the 2nd district. Together, they serve. And now, you had a primary between the 2. And while these are 2 candidates that Donald Trump has endorsed in the past, he had to make a decision. And with that decision, he endorsed Alex Mooney, the incumbent U.S. representative from West Virginia's 1st congressional district. And as a result, what you found was that while David McKinley was leading in the polls in October, in November, in December, Once that endorsement really was solidified, once Donald Trump really pushed forward that and you saw the impact of the endorsement over the course of a month, Alex Mooney took the lead. And then it got slightly closer, but the overall average was Alex Mooney in the lead. And by the final poll, Mooney was defeating McKinley by 15 points, 20 points, and 11 points. The final result ended up being about a 20-point, 19-point margin of victory for Alex Mooney over David McKinley. And the interesting thing about this is that when you take a look at the results, this actually is a near capturing of the entire district. Keep in mind, in the old map, David McKinley won in primaries across the 1st district, across this region of West Virginia. And what you found was that exact region, with the exception of 3 counties where David McKinley did well, you found that McKinley ended up losing every single other county. Mooney ended up defeating him every single part of his district with very few exceptions. It's very interesting, to say the least, but it shows the impact of Donald Trump's endorsement in the state of West Virginia, and in states that could be very similar ideology-wise and in terms of Republican primary presence. I think candidates such as Liz Cheney are now much more worried about what their primary might actually look like. On one hand, Nebraska looks like a saving grace, but keep in mind it was a 3-way race. While Charles Herbster did have 6 months to advertise this endorsement and really use it to his advantage, ultimately, it was a very close race. It wasn't as if he was defeated by the margin that you saw an incumbent sitting U.S. representative get defeated by. David McKinley barely passing 1/3 of the vote in a district where he made up the majority of that district under the old map, because if you take a look at it, his entire former district was engulfed and thrown into this new 2nd district, whereas Alex Mooney, about half of it was reverted back to the 1st congressional district. It's very interesting, but now this sets up David McKinley for potentially a Senate bid in 2024, where he very well could win the nomination. Maybe it was a blessing in disguise. But the point isn't about blessings in disguises or moving forward through future elections. This result is about Donald Trump's impact and what it actually does. On one hand, it doesn't show a domination of a primary, but it does show this candidate in a pretty competitive position. On the other hand, when it comes down to a 2-way race, that endorsement really does matter. And I think it also shows you that maybe a cross pushback on the endorsements don't really make an impact, as much as at least we saw in the state of Nebraska. If you take a look at the endorsements that David McKinley received, who do you have? Mike Pompeo, a Trump admin official and former United States Secretary of State. Joe Manchin, a Democratic senator from the state of West Virginia. Jim Justice, the governor, a Republican, of West Virginia. Andrew Yang, a technical independent, very well known for running under the Democratic Party. But the point is, you have 2 Democrats, notable ones I would say, Joe Manchin especially, and you have Mike Pompeo and the governor of the state. The governor of the state made a Republican win in Nebraska, but ultimately was a part of a candidate and a candidacy ticket that only resulted in 35% of the vote. West Virginia is a state that listened to Donald Trump's endorsement through and through, because the numbers did a complete flip-flop. What was a McKinley lead turned into a Mooney lead, and at no point did they reconverge, at least on the overall average. And it shows you that Trump's endorsement makes a super significant impact in 2-way races and in states similar to West Virginia. Like I said with Liz Cheney, Wyoming is a very similar state when it comes down to partisan composition. Donald Trump received 70% of the vote in Wyoming in 2016 and 2020. You found that Donald Trump performed the best here out of any candidate in modern history in the state of Wyoming. You go back to Mitt Romney, he's getting 68%, while in 2020, Trump got 70% of the vote, actually improved off of his overall percentage of the vote share in 2016. 2008, John McCain got 65%. In 2004, it was up there, 69%. In 2000, it was 69% again. But you go back, West Virginia was competitive in 96. It was competitive in 92, a 5.6% victory for George W. Bush. You go back to 88. Bush couldn't even get it. The first Bush couldn't get above 60. Reagan was the only one who really got back to that 70%. You go back to 80. Reagan's at 63%. You go back to 76. Ford is at that 60-point margin. Nixon couldn't hit 70%. So the point is that beyond Reagan, Donald Trump is the best performing Republican here, and of every election since 1984, the best performing Republican. And it tells you that in states similar to West Virginia, similar to Wyoming, while the margin was surely large for Trump in Nebraska, it wasn't nearly as large, which means that candidates in these races should definitely focus on Donald Trump's endorsements. I also think it matters if it's a two-way race versus a three-way race, and if there are notable endorsements against Donald Trump's. If you have a candidate who has no endorsement, obviously the Trump endorsement is going to carry that other candidate to victory. But if there are endorsements, potentially like we've seen in the state of Nebraska, where you have a very popular governor, where you have very recognizable names, it could make a difference. And spoiler candidates are very, very real, because you find it with Brad Lindstrom, where he's at 26% of the vote, mainly out of the Omaha metro area, because his endorsement came from these politicians, and it reduced the ability for Charles Herbster to win over an otherwise very strong region that we saw for Donald Trump in the state of Nebraska in the 2016 Republican presidential primary, where he got a significant portion of the vote, 62%, 63%. You saw a significant portion of voters in this region backing Donald Trump, yet they went for Brett Lindstrom mainly because of these endorsements, and it shows that endorsements do matter. But sometimes they might not, and it really depends on the state, but it also depends if you're running with a spoiler, if you're running in a two-way race versus a three-way race versus a four-way race, and who else has endorsed other candidates across the state, because sometimes you can combat a very large endorsement from President Trump, but it does show to be very, very difficult if it is achievable. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.